Reproductive cloning starts with a cytoplasmic donor, shown in the upper left. In the case of Dolly, the first cloned mammal, the cytoplasmic donor is a Scottish blackface sheep. The cytoplasmic donor donates a cell from his or her body, and it can be any type of cell because every cell in the organism has the DNA needed to create an entire new organism. The DNA is removed from the cell in a process called enucleation. In addition to a cytoplasmic donor, a nuclear donor is also needed, shown in the upper right. A nuclear donor is a female and donates an egg. This egg is also called an oocyte. The nucleus from the oocyte is removed and the nucleus from the donor is inserted. A new cell is now produced. The new cell is now given a small pulse of electricity to bind the nucleus to the enucleated oocyte's cytoplasm. In addition to binding the nucleus to the cytoplasm, this also helps start the dividing of the cell. The new cell is now placed in a female sheep's reproductive tract to grow. After 148 days, the normal length of time, Dolly was born. Dolly has the same DNA as the original donor. Therapeutic cloning is performed not to produce another organism, but to harvest embryonic stem cells for use in medical treatment. Embryonic stem cells are those cells found inside developing embryos. They can be used to produce a number of different cells, including connective tissue, nervous cells, or even blood cells. Just like reproductive cloning, a cell is removed from the patient requiring medical treatment. This is the cytoplasmic donor. The nucleus of the cell is removed and is inserted into an empty donor egg, the nuclear donor. Division is encouraged through the use of special chemicals or an electric current. Now this produces a blastocyst containing stem cells. Up to this point, therapeutic cloning is the same as reproductive cloning. However, after this point, it is entirely different. Rather than inserting this new cell into a reproductive tract to grow, it is placed into a petri dish and stem cells are produced. Also, rather than producing a completely new organism, these stem cells can be coerced into becoming blood cells, cells of the nervous system, connective tissue, or really any body part.
Have been cloned. Not on that list, humans. Yet.
Szabo says he's one step away from making a clone of another person. Our Dave Spencer takes a look at what this means for the future of medicine in today's top story.
It may sound like science fiction.
This is history in the making.
But for the past 6 or 7 years, cloning a human being has been a life ambition for Dr. Panos Zavos.
That's what keeps me alive, is that I'm doing fascinating things.
Dr. Zavos says he's doing this for a very specific purpose.
For people that don't have eggs and sperm and they don't want to borrow their neighbor's sperm or eggs, I think that the cloning modality is a viable issue and a viable choice for them.
He calls the process reprogramming.
What we do is that we take a cell from you, from the person that we want to create. We take the eggs from the woman, we remove the DNA, and we pull the whole DNA molecule that we get from the man or the woman that we want to procreate.
Saying it's quite similar to reproduction the natural way, with a slight twist.
Body cells, not sexual cells, the egg or the sperm.
A process he's done already in 11 separate embryos. None, however, have produced the desired effect.
The chapter that we want to write is to continue transferring until we get a pregnancy.
But that's not to say he won't be able to describe what a finished product or success story would look like.
This will be a lateral or a lateral-born twin.
Critics, and there are more than a few, argue the potential for abuse is there. Dr. Zavos says any new technology can be abused, and this one is in need of strong regulation. But he says he'll just concentrate on the science end.
I'm interested in treating infertility. That's it. No more, no less.
In Lexington, Dave Spencer, WKYT 27 News First.
Dr. Zavos says he's been extremely busy touring the globe and raising awareness on his research and recent breakthroughs.
Cloning has played a role far larger than I think it's likely to play in the future of science and medicine. The money, the ability to do something useful with cloning is probably over on the research side of cloning, not on the reproductive.
That means cloning to create stem cells that can grow into replacement organs. And while that's pretty cool, Science fiction likes to take it one step further.
I think Hollywood is absolutely in love with the idea of human cloning. They can sort of use it as the archetypical villain. Cloning fears play on a couple of things. They sort of challenge our notion of uniqueness and individuality. They also sort of raise the issue of, how much of who we are can be duplicated or replicated or manufactured.
Hi, my name is Carrie McIntosh, and I teach and write in the fields of assisted reproduction, cloning, and genetic engineering. As a center scholar, one of my goals is to challenge orthodox views of these technologies. For example, there's been some recent medical research which indicates that children conceived through in vitro fertilization and related technologies have a slightly higher rate of birth defects and other health problems. Now, the orthodox view of this data is to say there ought to be a law. The government needs to step in and regulate these technologies and perhaps even ban some of them. But if you sit down and actually delve deeper into the medical literature, what you find is that certain men and women have characteristics that not only make them infertile, but also make them more likely to have children with health problems. In other words, the technology isn't to blame. So there's a very interesting historical parallel here, one that I draw in my scholarship. It wasn't that long ago that the government actually sterilized disabled men and women to prevent them from transmitting health problems to their children. So what I do in my scholarship is argue that we shouldn't impose government restrictions on IVF and similar technologies, because if we did that, we would simply be forcing the equivalent of mandatory sterilization upon infertile men and women who really can't have children in any other way. And we should reject this brave new eugenics.
Because we believe in the principles of ethical medicine. As we seek to improve human life, we must always preserve human dignity. Advances in biomedical technology must never come at the expense of human conscience. Is deeply troubling to me and to most Americans. Life is a creation, not a commodity. Human cloning is wrong, and both forms of cloning ought to be banned for the following reasons. First, anything other than a total ban on human cloning would be unethical. Research cloning would contradict the most fundamental principle of medical ethics, that no human life should be exploited or extinguished for the benefit of another. Yet a law permitting research cloning, while forbidding the birth of a cloned child, would require the destruction of nascent human life. Secondly, anything other than a total ban on human cloning would be virtually impossible to enforce. Cloned human embryos created for research would be widely available in laboratories and embryo farms. Once cloned embryos were available, implantation would take place. Even the tightest regulations and stricting policing would not prevent or detect the birth of cloned babies. Third, the benefits of research cloning are highly speculative. Advocates of research cloning argue that stem cells obtained from cloned embryos would be injected into a genetically identical individual without risk of tissue rejection. But there is evidence based on animal studies that cells derived from cloned embryos may indeed be rejected. Yet even if research cloning were medically effective, Every person who wanted to benefit would need an embryonic clone of his or her own to provide the designer tissues. This would create a massive national market for eggs and egg donors and exploitation of women's bodies.